Morning, everybody. So today we're going to discuss a somewhat difficult topic, which is career direction for a driver. I've given this a lot of thought, and I think it comes down by age group. It felt like, what your priorities and goals are for someone in their 40s and 50s may be completely different from someone in their 20s and 30s. I met a young owner-operator, probably the youngest owner-operator I've ever met in my entire career. I met him in the Lenore City Terminal in Tennessee. I was doing laundry. I was talking to him. He was very impressive, young and impressive. He was 28 years old. He already purchased a truck. He and his wife had a plan, and he was getting ready to buy a second truck. So his first truck was a Crete truck. His second truck, he wants to buy a Kenworth, and he's only 28, and that's amazing. And for someone that young, because it's really rare to see someone so young become an owner operator. But he was doing it, and he was knocking it out of the park. So the plan that he and his wife were coming up with is that they're both young. They're both in their 20s. They want to eventually form a small trucking company that hires multiple drivers. So there'll be a mom and pop operation, okay, which is great. Their career ambition and plans is going to be completely different than, say, someone who's older. So I didn't start in trucking until I was in my mid-40s. And my focus was coming out of management, corporate America, was I didn't want to hire employees. I've had enough of employees. I didn't want to deal with the headache. All I want to do is focus on my own needs and save for retirement. So my goals were completely different, in my mid-40s than someone, for example, who was in their 20s. But what it really shows is your direction, because a lot of times drivers lack direction. They don't know where they're going. They don't have a plan. They just wing it. They're just like, I just go with the flow. I don't know where this is going, but wherever it's going, that's where it's taking me. And that's kind of like a recipe for disaster, because if you don't have a plan, then you can't manage the plan. You can't organize, and you can't stick to the plan. You can't modify the plan either. I think the younger you are, the more risk you can take. The older you are, the more conservative you become, because time is the variable here. When you're older, you don't have the next 30-40 years to save for retirement. You have at most probably 20 years to save for retirement. So you don't have the luxury of time. So what money you make and much money you save, you spend it very carefully, and you're gonna save money for retirement. When you're younger, you've got this long, path in front of you, and you can take more risk. You don't have to play it so safe, and you don't have to save nearly as much money, because you're young. Time is going to work on your side, because the formula for success is, or formula for generating wealth is, time and money. So when you're young, you have a lot of time, but you don't have a lot of money. When you're older, you have a lot more money, but you don't have as much time. So older people take that money, the more money, to play catch up. Younger people need to invest early with what little money they have, so that they can use time to their advantage. So different strategies for different age groups. But I think you begin with the end in mind. You don't just, wherever life takes you, that's where you're going to end up. Try to begin with the end in mind. It's like, okay, when you reach age 65 and you want to retire, how much money do you want? I think for most drivers, I think if you had a CDL and you had 20 years of driving experience in your career, you should retire as a millionaire. Absolutely. There's no reason for it. You have no excuses. But oftentimes that doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because they didn't play the cards right. They spent that money along the way, and they never learned how to manage the money, how to invest in stocks, how to grow their money, how to utilize compound interest. And so they lack direction. They have no direction in their career, no direction in their life. They don't know what's going to happen from one year to next year. I mean, that's true for everybody, but in general, you should have a plan, some kind of plan, and then work towards that plan. I've talked to company drivers that are in their 60s, been driving truck for 30 years, and they have no money. And then you compare that to this young man who's 28, he's an owner-operator, and he's getting ready to buy his second truck. And he has a plan. Him and his wife, they'll probably be multi-millionaires by the time they reach retirement age. And they'll be employing, several different drivers if everything goes right. But they're young and they're ambitious, which is great. The most impressive young driver I ever met. Most drivers don't have that level of direction. They don't have a plan. They have no idea what they're doing, one year to the next. Their plan is hope, and hope is not a plan. So I think when you look for direction, you need to think about what your priorities are. And a lot of it will come down to what age group you're in. And your priorities may change over the years as you grow older. But I would suggest begin with the end in mind. How do you want to finish up, as a driver? What is your ultimate goal? When you reach retirement age, where do you want to be financially? I think too often drivers are unsure, what's the correct strategies, what's the correct tactics, how are they going to reach these goals? There's a lot of variation in that, and then that just comes down to personal preference. Whether you buy a Cascadia or you buy a Peterbilt or you buy a Volvo or you buy a Mac, those are just strategies and tactics. It's really more like tactics. Your strategy is to retire as a millionaire. Well, how you get there is all tactical. Whether you stay with one carrier, go to another carrier, go to the spot market, those things are all different types of tactics on how you're going to achieve your goal. But I think you need to define what your goal is, define what direction your direction is, and then fill in, the details along the way. I just think most drivers are somewhat lost. And maybe they're overwhelmed by the amount of information, amount of opportunities and choices they have to make. But if you do create an end goal, that helps you focus. It's like I know what my end goal is. Anything that deviates from that end goal, I'm not interested in it. So for me, it's saving and investing. So when I think about buying, an average house, what do they say nowadays, $400,000 for an average house. That's an average house. I don't need that. That's not going to help me reach my goal. I'm not out there buying fishing boats and motorcycles or upgrading to luxury pickup trucks and oversized RVs. Those things all cost money, and they divert from my goal. My goal isn't to have a lavish lifestyle. My goal is to save and invest so that when I reach retirement age, I'm able to retire. That's my goal. Now, someone who's younger, they may have a wife and dependents, and they're raising a family. Their priorities are going to be different, which is fine, perfectly fine. They're younger, they have a longer runway to work with. Their priorities are different. And they don't need to save as much money because they'll use time to their advantage. So the concept here is, you need to define your goals, and that will provide you some direction, or where you're going to go, where you're going to take this career. How you get there, that's all up to your strategies and tactics. But first, define where the hell you're going. Where do you want to be? And then work towards that goal. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.